there was a unanimous ruling from the Supreme Court on 9-0 ruling that ordered that the Trump administration has to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia from CCOT in El Salvador and obviously bring him back to the United States. There are some further developments on that situation as well. There was a gigantic orgy among some of the biggest losers in the Trump administration on Monday where they welcomed Nayib Bukele, who was the president of El Salvador, into the White House to discuss stuff like this and also to discuss some more disgusting shit like the potentially deporting American criminals, like American citizen criminals, to El Salvador, depending on the nature of the crime. Now, of course, the stipulation with that is Donald Trump says that it's only going to be for like the most heinous people, but I don't believe that at all. I think that if you just criticize Israel, you will get sent to El Salvador. It doesn't really matter to them.
Will require the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That's the Maryland man who was sent to El Salvador by mistake, despite having protected legal status, preventing his deportation to El Salvador, where he escaped political violence back in 2011. Abrego Garcia was sent last month to that country's notorious mega prison following what the government said was an administrative error. Our Devin Dwyer joins us now with more on all of this. Devin, what is the Supreme Court exactly ordering the Trump administration to do to remedy this?
Phil, this was a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court upholding a lower court order that it facilitate the return of Mr. Garcia. As you said, he was wrongly sent to El Salvador, to that prison that we've heard so much about with a history of human rights abuses. He was detained in this country. He is an alleged gang member. He denies those affiliations. Those facts aren't in dispute. But an immigration court here in the United States had explicitly said he was not to be returned to El Salvador for fears of threats to his life. That, of course, has now happened. And the Supreme Court, in no uncertain terms, Phil, said that action was illegal on the part of the Trump administration. And that while it shows deference to the administration and its ability and timing to bring him back, it does need to be done in compliance with due process of law, Phil. And that's a very significant development tonight.
You talk about law, Devin. I'm wondering if there's any chance of more legal back and forth on this issue, or will this effectively start the process of bringing Abrego Garcia home?
Well, we'll have to see how the Trump administration responds. They had said they didn't have the power to return him. The Supreme Court apparently wasn't having any of that. They said that the district court order was proper, that this can be done. They expect the government to comply and correct its mistakes. So we'll see if there's further litigation here. We do know his family, his attorneys have said they expect him to come back to the United States. Remember, he is not going to be just let loose in the United States. This is someone that was under a withholding order. But again, this was about righting a wrong, a legal wrong, a moral wrong, and standing up for due process of law. And tonight, Phil, the Supreme Court unanimously did just that. Phil.
Devin Dwyer on the breaking news for us from the Supreme Court. Devin, thank you.
The odds of getting a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling in 2025 is like seeing Halley's Comet. This is probably one of the more divided courts that we've ever had, especially considering the Republican supermajority. And there have been some, strange rulings or rulings where like Amy Coney Barrett sided with the liberal justices. But I think sometimes it gets to a point where the Supreme Court knows that they have to rule properly on certain things, especially when it comes to this magnitude, because we're not just talking about executive decision making. We're not talking about letting poop water flow back in through the streams of the United States in rural areas. We are talking in this instance about due process. We're talking fundamentally about due process. If you're a resident of the United States or even a person in the United States like Kilmar Abrego Garcia is, you cannot just be deported because the fucking administration says so. He had an order of protection to remain in the United States. I don't even know why ABC is lending credence to him being an alleged gang member. There is no evidence to support that. There's no evidence to support a large portion of deportations that the Trump administration has conducted so far. He, Donald Trump, must facilitate the return of this man, according to the Supreme Court. Now, we're running into an instance where Donald Trump and all of his fucking stupid assholes that are in his orbit, they're just deciding to ignore the courts because they understand, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has no enforcement mechanism. It's literally just 9 people saying that you can or can't do something. The president has a standing army. The president has the ability to just fucking do whatever he wants, especially since the Supreme Court granted him immunity. But it is beyond abhorrent that we're still even having this discussion when not only the Supreme Court has ruled on it now, but multiple lower court judges have said that this is not within the president's ability. Now, of course, people like Stephen Miller and Marco Rubio are going to say to the contrary because they are dick suckers to the highest degree. They are going to say whatever the president wants to hear. Before we get to that video of them, we're going to talk about this article from Politico that says the Trump administration contends it has no duty to return illegally deported man to the U.S. The Trump administration insisted Sunday that it has no legal obligation to arrange for the return of a Maryland man illegally deported from the United States, arguing that a Supreme Court ruling last week only requires officials to admit him into the country if he makes it back from a high-security prison in El Salvador. That is not what the Supreme Court ruled. Stephen Miller is trying to dance around this point. Marco Rubio is trying to dance around this point. In their decision, they said the Trump administration must facilitate the return. Do you know what it means to facilitate something? It means to undergo a process to achieve to achieve whatever result you're looking for. Justice Department lawyers told a federal judge that they don't interpret the Supreme Court's Thursday ruling that the administration facilitate Kilmar Abrego Garcia's release as obligating the administration to do anything more than adjust his immigration status to admit him if El Salvador's government chooses to release him. These people are just Nazis. That's it. That's all they are. They are fascist authoritarians. They don't believe in the rule of law. The rule of law only applies to us and not them. I don't understand how you, as a lawyer with a fully developed brain and a working frontal lobe, can interpret this decision entirely differently from what the court ruled unless you're doing it disingenuously, which I know that the Trump administration lawyers are. The Justice Department is no longer in a quote-unquote unbiased institution, even though we know, obviously, all of the intelligence agencies and legal agencies have never been truly unbiased, but there was at least a veneer of impartiality. Now, thanks to fucking Pam Bondi and Donald Trump lining all of these agencies with the sycophants, they're going to exclusively operate in the way that the Trump administration wants them to. With El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele set to meet President Trump on Monday, DOJ attorneys argued the courts have no power to require the administration to engage with the Salvadoran government to reach a diplomatic solution. They contend such a potential order would amount to a violation of the separation of powers and an intrusion into what they allege is unfettered presidential power to conduct foreign relations. Except this is how the separation of powers works. This is entirely within the Supreme Court's ability to check and to balance. The idea that the president has unfettered ability to do whatever the fuck he wants is farcical. It's made up. It's a lie. The founding fathers specifically wrote the Constitution to make sure that the president has the least power of all 3 branches, because if the president is the most powerful member of government, guess what? You have a fucking dictatorship or a monarchy. The president can only act unilaterally when it comes to wartime decisions. Quote, all of those requested orders involve interactions with the foreign sovereign and potential violations of that sovereignty, Justice Department attorneys wrote in a 7-page submission to U.S. District Judge Paula Zenas. A federal court cannot compel the executive branch to engage in any mandated act of diplomacy or incursion upon the sovereignty of another nation. The administration's position suggests officials do not view the Supreme Court order as compelling them to seek Abrego Garcia's return. The Salvadoran native entered the country illegally around 2011, and has been living in Maryland. The Trump administration has admitted it deported him to El Salvador in violation of a 2019 immigration court order barring his deportation to that country. Though Abrego Garcia was denied asylum, a judge found he could not be sent to his home country because of the legitimate fear of persecution by a local gang. He has protected status as a United States resident. An immigration judge saw his case and ruled that it would be a danger to him, to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, to allow him to be deported back to his home country of El Salvador. The administration continued Sunday to flout a Friday order from Zenas to deliver, quote, daily updates to get the court describing its efforts to return Abrego Garcia to the United States. Sunday's update from Evan Katz, an assistant director of removal operations for ICE, said the administration had no updates for the judge. A day earlier, in a similarly threadbare update, the administration turned to Michael Kozak, the State Department senior bureau official in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, who said Abrego Garcia was still alive in El Salvador's Secot prison. The administration is also bucking demands from Abrego Garcia's attorneys that officials detail the arrangement to ship hundreds of foreign nationals to a notorious prison in El Salvador. One of the Sunday filings insists those details are classified and could be subject to attorney-client and state secrets privileges. Quote, it would be inappropriate for this court to hastily order production of these sensitive documents, said Justice Department lawyer Drew Ensign. The administration also said it would resist efforts by Zenas to demand testimony from officials about their thinking on Abrego Garcia's personal return, saying that such disclosures, quote, could interfere with ongoing diplomatic discussions, particularly in the context of President Bukele's ongoing trip to the United States. Still, the administration's narrow review of its obligations under the Supreme Court ruling appears to up the stakes of a hearing Zenas had scheduled for Tuesday afternoon to assess the steps officials are taking for Abrego Garcia's return. Now, President Nayib Bukele has since arrived in the United States, and he's gone to the White House. He's met with Donald Trump. Again, they've had some really fucking sickening conversations. This tweet is courtesy of Ed Krasenstein. This might be the most vile, lie-soaked anti-American gaslighting yet. He writes, the Trump administration and El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele are refusing to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia, an innocent man illegally deported and locked in a foreign prison. Marco Rubio flat out lies, claiming Abrego was here illegally despite clear evidence to the contrary. Stephen Miller spins a unanimous 9-0 court defeat as some kind of twisted win, and Trump, he lashes out at Caitlin Collins for the crime of asking why an American legal resident is rotting in a torture prison abroad. Let's get to the video.
As a citizen of El Salvador, he was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin.
Yeah, okay, so that's not how this situation works. We live in a time where up is down, down is up, the sky is green, the grass is blue. These people do not have any interest in living in reality. They all live in a bubble, and the bubble is whatever the fuck they want it to be. I'm sure in Marco Rubio's bubble, he's 6'4", and not this 5'7" manlet who is suckling at the teat of Donald Trump, who ass blasted him religiously when Marco Rubio was running in the Republican primary. Kilmar Abrego Garcia has a right to remain in the United States because an immigration judge ruled that to be the case. These people do not want any immigrants in the country at all. It's the minute that the mainstream media acknowledges the fascist nature of the Republican Party, the better off we'll be in having discourse. You cannot have serious conversations with unserious actors.
Except for Venezuela, that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President. No, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States.
Dude, that's not even fucking true. The extent that the president has foreign policy, has unilateral foreign policy, is because Congress has allowed it to go unchecked, because they also agree with the United States foreign policy of death and destruction to brown people, Muslims, and the global South. In a functioning government, for example, we'll use the drone strikes on the Houthis. That is an act of war that Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance just did. In a functioning government, or in the world that the White House operates as it should, the president receives a declaration of war from Congress to do that strike. But they just bypass that because everybody is in agreement. United States foreign policy is uniparty. It is partisan. They all work at the behest of the military-industrial complex. They choose to drop bombs on virtually every fucking non-white country. But the president should not be allowed to do this unilaterally.
It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But
so we're not going to talk about this today, but this is the terrorism discussion is going to become really interesting if conservatives ever decide to speak up about the person who firebombed Josh Shapiro's house. I wonder if Pam Bondi is going to seek charges against him. I wonder if Donald Trump is going to consider sending him to El Salvador. So the terrorism conversation is going to become very interesting. But Stephen Miller, this bald idiot, is just that. There is nothing on his head. There's nothing inside of his skull. You are a fucking nincompoop if you look at the court decision as a win for the Republican Party. You are coping. You are a loser trying to just get any possible scent of a win. The Supreme Court, in no uncertain terms, said that Kilmar Abrego Garcia has to be returned home by the Trump administration. The Trump administration has full power to exert over El Salvador. You think that Nayib Bukele is a fucking major player in global affairs? Dude, come on. Don't be naive. I'm sorry to all my El Salvadorans. There's no fucking way that President Trump would not be able to twist the arm of fucking Nayib Bukele. He just doesn't want to, because they are the two most prominent dictators in the Western Hemisphere. And Donald Trump needs new allies since he's burning bridges with literally every other Western-aligned nation.
President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Which, by the way, has to go through a judge. Like, we are already, like, way deep into fascism. We are halfway to a full-blown fascist dictatorship. It doesn't fucking matter if someone is a terrorist or not. If you accuse them of terrorism, you have to present their case to a judge and to a jury. Once we moved past that, citizenship status does not fucking matter. The whole idea of due process not only allows the judge and the jury to assess the evidence and figure out a punishment, but that punishment is dictated upon one's citizenship status, which is proved during the court case. If you're just deporting people to El Salvador because they're criminals without any due process, if I committed a crime, me, a natural-born U.S. citizen, I could also be deported to El Salvador. Like, this is a crucial piece of the conversation. It's not just the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia in particular. It's not just the case of Mahmoud Khalil in particular. Obviously, the specifics of those cases matter, but they all share the same macro approach in that it is two individuals being stripped of their constitutional right to due process. And even further, it is two individuals who were given permanent legal residency being stripped of their constitutional right to due process.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago, and they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over, and that's why nobody watches you anymore? You know, you have no credibility. Please, go ahead.
President Trump.
He's such a fucking loser. He's such a fucking man baby. Imagine being so shallow and so insecure that you cannot even take the mildest amount of criticism. You want everyone to just bow at your fucking disgusting altar. It's so sad. There's no other way that I can describe it. I could not imagine being 80 years old and having no self-esteem. It's really sad that Donald Trump behaves this way as a grown man. Obviously, he's still vile and despicable and disgusting as a policy generator. I don't want that to get lost, but he's just such an insecure little man. I mean, Caitlin Collins, listen, I'm not the biggest Caitlin Collins fan, but that is a legitimate question to ask of somebody. Republicans don't see it this way because they never cared about due process. They never cared about law and order. They never cared. Well, I don't want to say that because at a certain point they did. But after COVID, the Republican Party just became a bunch of fucking brain dead fascist lunatics who will stop at nothing until they get the fucking Trump states of America. Why does the entire Republican Party choose to revere this spineless, disgusting coward? It doesn't make any sense. They want North Korea. In the lead up to the second Trump term, I used to explain to people in a really reductive way how bad it would be. I used to think that Donald Trump would turn the United States into basically a state similar to Russia. I now firmly believe that we are headed towards North Korea status, a hyper isolationist hermit nation where our president, quote unquote president, is basically a monarch who has been ordained by God. And there is a non-zero percentage of the population that legitimately believes that. There's a non-zero percentage of the population. It's probably like 10 to 15% who want Donald Trump to be this dictator.